The last light of the day bled out across the plains, a molten band of gold fading into bruised violet. Wind dragged long threads of dust over the empty road that led to Lydia's homestead, a place stitched together from weathered boards and stubborn will. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and old rain. The stove gave off a weak, orange glow, the kind that made a room seem smaller than it was. Lydia stood at the window, watching clouds bruise the sky, wondering if the storm would reach them before nightfall. Her mother lay dozing on a cot near the fire, her breath thin and irregular. Lydia had learned to count the pauses, to know when to worry. She'd been alone with that sound too long. Wind, creaking wood, the soft rasp of a dying woman. It had become the rhythm of her days. When thunder cracked in the distance, she didn't flinch. The storm would come and it would pass. Everything did. Eventually, a shape appeared on the road just as the first drops hit the glass. 2 riders, a man and a child. Lydia's pulse quickened. Travelers rarely came this way. There was nothing out here worth the trouble. She grabbed her father's old rifle from beside the door and stepped onto the porch, the wind biting her face. The man saw her silhouette and raised a hand, not in threat, but in greeting. His horse, a dark gelding, trembled with exhaustion. Behind him rode a small girl on a gray pony, her rein cloak too large, her hair plastered to her cheeks. "Evening, ma'am." The man called over the wind. His voice was rough but steady. "We've been caught out by the storm. Just looking for a roof to keep the little one dry." Lydia kept the rifle low, but ready. The girl's face was pale, frightened but trusting, clutching the reins like they were a lifeline. Something in that look loosened Lydia's guard. "There's the barn," she said finally, nodding toward the back. "You can stable your horses there. The roof mostly holds." He tipped his hat. "Much obliged." While they unsaddled the horses, Lydia lit another lantern and filled a kettle. The smell of wet leather followed them when they stepped inside, water streaming from their coats. The man had the look of someone used to command but unwilling to show it. Broad shoulders, clean-shaven despite the road, eyes that caught every corner of the room in a glance. The girl, maybe 8 or 9, hid behind him until Lydia crouched and offered a small smile. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Evie," the girl whispered. Lydia nodded. "You're safe here, Evie. Sit by the fire, get warm." The man hesitated before removing his hat. "Name's Jonas." "Thank you kindly. We won't be trouble." Lydia poured them tea from a cracked pot. Her mother stirred on the cot, muttering something Lydia couldn't make out. Jonas kept his voice low. "Your ma unwell?" "She's been that way a while." Lydia's tone left no room for sympathy. "Ain't much the doctor in town can do." He nodded, respectful. Silence stretched between them, filled by the sound of rain hammering the roof. Lydia studied him while pretending not to. His hands were rough but clean, the calluses not from hard labor but from holding reins, maybe a gun. His coat was good leather, too fine for a drifter. The horses outside were better fed than most she'd seen this side of the territory. Evie sipped her tea and looked around. "You live here all by yourself?" "Mostly," Lydia said. "Got a few hens, a mule that hates me, and a land that don't give much back." Jonas gave a faint smile. "That's more than some folks have." She shrugged, uncomfortable under his gaze. "Hardly feels like it most days." When the storm thickened, they stayed near the fire. Jonas offered to sleep in the barn, but Lydia shook her head. "Rain will cut through the walls. You and the girl can stay inside. Floor is dry enough." She laid out blankets near the hearth while he murmured thanks. The room filled with the soft crackle of burning wood and Evie's quiet breathing. For a while, Lydia listened to the storm's rhythm against the roof and tried to remember the last time the house had held more than her mother's fading breath. Jonas watched the flames. "You always taking strangers this way?" "Only when they got a child with them," she said. "Figure bad men don't travel with angels." That earned a short, quiet laugh from him, though his eyes didn't soften. "You'd be surprised what kind of men wear halos out here." Lydia looked away, feeling something shift between them, an unspoken recognition of loneliness. Outside, the wind tore at the shutters like something alive. Later, when Evie had fallen asleep curled in her father's coat, Lydia stepped outside to check the horses. The rain had eased to a fine mist, silver in the lantern light. She ran her hand over the gelding's neck, muscles taut, skin sleek. The saddle bore an insignia she didn't recognize, the kind that marked ownership or wealth. Jonas's story about finding work seemed thinner by the minute. He joined her silently, hands in his pockets. "Sorry for imposing," he said. "Didn't expect the weather to turn." "You're welcome to wait it out," she replied. "But I don't keep charity for men running from something." He met her eyes, neither denying nor confirming. "Then I'll make sure you don't regret it." A moment passed, heavy with unsaid things. The weight of the plains pressing close, the smell of wet earth, the far-off rumble of thunder retreating east. Lydia studied him in the dim light. There was something about the way he carried himself, the quiet vigilance of a man who'd seen too much to rest easy. When she returned inside, she found her mother awake, watching her with clouded eyes. "You let strangers in," the old woman rasped. "They needed help." Her mother's voice was thin as parchment. "Mercy's dear in this world, girl. Spend it careful." Lydia tucked the blanket around her and whispered, "It's only for one night." But even as she said it, a restlessness crawled under her skin. She felt in the floorboards in the silence between raindrops, the sense that something had shifted, that their quiet life had tilted towards something vast and unknowable. Jonah sat by the fire, eyes fixed on the flames. His coat hung to dry, revealing the outline of a revolver at his side. Lydia's hand brushed the rifle leaning near the door, not out of fear, but readiness. Outside, the wind changed direction. The storm was leaving, but the air held a strange stillness, the kind that comes before another kind of trouble. Jonas looked up at her, his face half in shadow. "You've got courage," he said softly. "That's rare. Courage don't keep the roof fixed or the cupboards full." "No," he said, voice barely above the crackle of fire. "But it keeps people alive." The words lingered long after he fell quiet. Lydia sat near the window, listening to the storm's final sigh, watching the dark horizon swallow the road. Somewhere beyond that darkness, she felt the weight of unseen eyes, of a story moving toward them whether they wanted it or not. When she finally lay down, sleep came shallow and strange. She dreamed of hoofbeats across the wet earth, of lantern light flickering over faces she didn't know. And beneath it all, the faint whisper of a promise or warning. One night was never just one night in the West. The fire dimmed to embers. Jonas kept watch, his hand resting lightly on the revolver. Outside, the wind carried the scent of dust and iron. Morning would come, but peace would not. Dawn came soft and gray, the kind of morning that made the land look older than it was. Mist rose from the ground like ghosts reluctant to leave, curling to the corral and across the fields that had long since given up trying to grow anything. Lydia stepped outside with a pail in her hand and the chill biting her fingers. She found Jonas already awake, sleeves rolled, patching the broken fence as if he'd lived there all his life. Evie was still sleeping inside, her small form wrapped in Lydia's spare quilt. "You don't have to do that," Lydia called. He didn't look up. "I'm not one to take a roof without earning it." His voice carried a quiet conviction, the kind that didn't need argument. Lydia watched him work for a moment, each measured strike of the hammer, the precision in his movements, not the motions of a farmer. Something cleaner, practiced. When he finally straightened and turned, the sun caught the faint scar running along his jaw, the kind made by a blade rather than accident. She filled the silence. "You've done this sort of thing before?" He gave a small, knowing smile. "Mending fences or running from storms?" "Either." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Both, I suppose." Lydia didn't press. Out here, everyone had a past worth hiding. Still, something about his tone stuck in her thoughts, the weary amusement of a man who'd seen more than he wanted to remember. Inside, her mother was awake, coughing softly. Lydia brought her tea, but her eyes were fixed on Jonas through the window. "That man's built for war, not for work," she murmured. Lydia frowned. "He's got a child with him." "Even wolves bring pups," her mother said, her voice thin but sharp. The words lingered as Lydia returned to the yard. Evie had woken and followed her outside, barefoot in the dirt, her hair wild from sleep. "Pa says you're brave," the girl said matter-of-factly. Lydia crouched beside her. "He says too much." Evie tilted her head. "He don't talk much at all. Not since Mama." She stopped, lips pressing shut. "Jonas," from across the yard, stiffened at the sound of that unfinished word. Lydia changed the subject quickly, asking Evie to help gather eggs, and the girl nodded, happy for a task. By midday, the air had warmed. The smell of wet earth lifted, replaced by dust and sunlight. Jonas repaired the barn door. Lydia fetched water from the well, and the rhythm of shared labor filled the silence between them. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was something close. When they sat for a late meal, cornbread beans, a bit of smoked meat saved for guests. Lydia caught Jonas watching Evie laugh over a crumb she dropped. There was tenderness there, heavy with guilt. He caught Lydia's glance and offered a faint smile, but his eyes were miles away. "You from the East?" she asked, sensing he needed words to anchor himself. "Farther than I care to remember," he said. "Owned land once. Big spread. Cattle, hands, the works." "You sold it." "Lost it," he replied simply. She waited, but he said no more. His hand brushed the table, tracing an invisible pattern in the wood. The fire popped in the hearth. Somewhere outside, a hawk screamed, the sound carrying across the plains. Lydia leaned back. "You don't talk like a man who's used to being poor." "Money don't teach manners," he said. "Loss does." The truth in that hung between them like smoke. Afternoon bled toward evening. Lydia took Evie to see the mule in the back paddock, the girl giggling when the animal snorted indignantly. Jonas stayed near the porch, carving something from a scrap of wood, a small horse, delicate as lace. His hands moved with care that didn't match his size. When Lydia and Evie returned, he handed the carving to the girl, without a word. She held it like treasure. Lydia smiled despite herself. "You're good with her." "Evie?" His eyes softened. "She's all I've got left that makes sense." Lydia wanted to ask what had stopped making sense, but she didn't need to. The silence that followed said enough. That evening, a wagon rattled down the distant road toward town. Lydia watched from the porch as the driver tipped his hat in greeting, then slowed to exchange a few words before moving on. When he was gone, Jonas asked quietly, "You trust your neighbors?" "I don't give them reason not to," she said. He nodded, though his expression remained wary. Later, when Evie slept again and Lydia was banking the fire, he said, "If men come asking about me, you'd best say you never saw us." She froze. "Should I expect them?" He stared into the flames. Men who deal in debts and revenge always find a way. Her hand tightened on the poker. "You bring that kind of trouble to my door?" "I bring only what's already following," he said evenly. "And if I could outrun it, I would have." She looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw, the weight of something buried behind his eyes. "What did you do?" He didn't answer, just rose and walked to the window, the light catching the faint gleam of metal at his belt. "Sometimes it ain't about what you did," he murmured. "It's about who wants to remember it." Lydia didn't sleep much that night. The wind had died, but the air carried a strange heaviness. She checked on her mother, then on Evie, who stirred restlessly in her sleep. When she glanced toward the hearth, she saw Jonas sitting there, still awake, still watching the dark beyond the window. The next morning brought dust instead of dew. The sun rose mean and bright, and Lydia went into town to trade eggs and flour. She heard the gossip before she even reached the store. 3 riders had passed through the night before, asking questions about a man with a little girl. Said he'd been traveling under a false name. Said there was a bounty on his head big enough to make men forget their manners. Lydia's pulse quickened. She kept her face neutral as she bartered for salt, but her thoughts ran like wild horses. When she rode home, the horizon shimmered with heat and fear. Jonas was chopping wood when she returned. He looked up once, read everything in her face, and set the axe down slowly. "They're close, then," he said. "You tell me why, and I might decide if I'm helping you or sending you on your way," she snapped. He studied her, then sighed. "You wouldn't believe it if I told you." "Try me." He wiped sweat from his brow, gaze fixed on the dry horizon. Men I work with own half the cattle in this territory. They decided one man should own it all. Burned my ranch, killed my wife, said I'd stolen from them, took everything but the girl and the guilt. The words came quiet, but each one landed like a stone in her chest. She wanted to doubt him, but his eyes, haunted and unguarded, didn't belong to a liar. And now, she asked, now they want to make sure no one remembers I ever lived, he said. They'll come through here soon enough. They always do. Lydia looked toward the fields. The empty stretch of land had been her whole world. She thought of her mother's warning, of mercy's cost. If they find you here, they'll burn this place too. I'll be gone before that happens. But the words didn't comfort her. She could see it in him, the fatigue of a man who'd run too far to keep running. She turned away, angry at him, at herself for caring, at the world for making kindness dangerous. As the sun sank behind the hills, the first hint of smoke appeared on the horizon, not from her chimney, but farther out, where no one should have been riding. Jonas saw it too. They found the trail, he said quietly. Lydia's throat tightened. What are you going to do? The air was thick enough to taste, dry and metallic. Lydia stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching the riders crawl across the horizon like ink spreading through paper. 3 of them, maybe more beyond sight, moving slow, confident, as though the outcome was already written. The setting sun burned behind their silhouettes, turning them into shadows on horseback. Jonas stood beside her, silent, his hand resting loosely near his revolver. You can still leave, Lydia said quietly. He didn't turn. Running's what got us here. Inside, Evie slept in the corner room, unaware of the gathering storm. Lydia's mother whispered prayers from her cot, her voice low and broken. The whole house seemed to be holding its breath. Jonas finally exhaled and stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching over the brittle earth. They won't hit before dark, he said. Men like that like to watch the fears settle first. Lydia followed him to barn, the smell of dust and horse sweat sharp in the air. You faced them before, she said. I buried some of them, he replied. He checked the rifle slung over his shoulder, then looked at her. But there's always more when money's involved. Always someone hungry enough to pull the trigger. She wanted to ask what he planned to do, but his face, set hollow-eyed, told her he already knew how the night would go. Lydia moved to gather what she could. Water, cartridges, a small knife her father had left her. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the strange calm sitting under it, the way the body steadies when there's no longer a choice left. When dusk fell, the riders split. 2 stayed by the ridge. 1 came down the road. Jonas stood in the open, waiting. The man rode close enough that Lydia could see the silver buckle at his belt, the smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Evening, friend, the rider drawled. We're looking for a fella travels with a little girl. Heard tell he's been seen around these parts. Jonas's voice was quiet. Don't know anyone fits that description. The rider smiled wider. Funny, you got the look of him. Same fine horse, same quiet mouth. Hard to mistake. He rested his hand on his pistol. Boss says you've been keeping what ain't yours. Says you owe him. I owed him my soul once, Jonas said. He collected enough. The rider's grin turned mean. Then I'll take the rest. Jonas moved first. The crack of his revolver split the still air, a flash of light in the growing dark. The rider's body hit the ground before the sound reached the ridge. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the others spurred their horses and the night erupted. Lydia ran inside, shouting for her mother to stay low. She found Evie awake, wide-eyed, clutching the wooden horse Jonas had carved. It's just noise, Lydia whispered, pulling her toward the cellar. Stay quiet, no matter what. Outside, gunfire tore through the dusk. Jonas ducked behind the water trough, returning fire in sharp, precise bursts. The riders circled, trying to flank him, their shouts echoing across the open land. Lydia pressed Evie into her mother's arms, then grabbed her rifle and stepped out the back door. Her pulse hammered in her throat, but her hands were steady. The first thing she saw was Jonas pinned near the barn, a bullet grazing his shoulder. One of the riders crept along the fence line, aiming low. Lydia lifted her rifle, took a breath, and fired. The shot caught the man square in the chest. He staggered, looked at her in disbelief, and fell into the dirt. The sound seemed to swallow the world. Jonas turned, eyes flashing to where she stood. "You shouldn't be out here." "Neither should you," she called back. He almost smiled, then ducked as another shot split the air. The last rider had taken cover behind the feed wagon, firing wild. Lydia crouched behind a barrel, loading fast. Jonas limped toward her, wincing with every step. "He's reloading," she hissed. "Good," Jonas said. "Then he's mine." He stepped out before she could stop him. The rider's gun rose, but Jonas's bullet found him first. The man toppled backward, his hat flying off into the wind. The echo faded, leaving only the harsh rasp of breathing and the distant cry of a coyote. Lydia lowered her rifle. The silence felt wrong, too still. Jonas wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His fingers came away red. "Shoulders worse than I thought," he muttered. She helped him inside, her arm around his waist. Evie ran to him, tears spilling down her face. "Pa, you're hurt." "I've been hurt worse," he said, forcing a smile. "But we're still here, aren't we?" Lydia guided him to a chair and fetched clean cloth. Her hands moved quickly, wrapping the wound as best she could. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't complain. "You shoot like someone who's done it before," he said. "My pa taught me when I was 10, she replied. "So the land don't care what gender you are, only how fast you draw." Jonas gave a faint laugh that turned into a cough. "Smart man." "Dead man," she said softly. Outside, the night had gone quiet again, except for the wind. Lydia stepped a window, scanning the dark fields. "You think that's all of them?" Jonas shook his head. "No, they'll send more. The ones that ran will tell their boss where I am. And what happens then?" He met her eyes, the flicker of firelight reflecting in them. "Then they'll burn this place to the ground if it means getting to me." Lydia swallowed hard. "You could leave now. Take Evie. I'll tell anyone who comes that you went north." Jonas's gaze softened. "And leave you here to face them alone? I can handle myself." "I know you can," he said. "But that ain't the point." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with things unsaid, the weight of survival, of what mercy costs in a world like theirs. Lydia could see it now, not just a danger following him, but the man underneath it. Someone who'd once had everything, now reduced to the barest instinct to protect what remained. She sat across from him, watching the fire dance over the rough plains of his face. "You think there's any place left in this country where peace still lives?" Jonas looked at Evie, asleep again with her small hands clutching the carved horse. "Maybe wherever she ends up," he said. "That'll have to be enough." Lydia didn't know what to say. Outside, the first cold wind of night brushed against the house, whispering across the plains like a warning. She stood to check the door, then paused when she saw movement far out on the road. A single horse, riderless, moving slow. The dead man's horse. It wandered toward the fence, stopping as if waiting for a new master. Lydia watched it, a chill creeping through her bones. "Jonas," she said quietly, "that horse out there, it ain't the storm I'm afraid of anymore." He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "Neither am I." He took the rifle from her hands, checked the chamber, and nodded. "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow won't be kind." She wanted to argue, but there was no point. The night outside pulsed with unseen movement. Predators circling, debts coming due. Lydia lingered by the window as he went to sit near Evie again, his shadow large against the firelight. When the wind shifted, it carried with it the faint smell of smoke, not from their hearth but from the direction of town. Lydia's stomach tightened. Trouble was spreading faster than any storm. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure she believed. The first light of dawn came pale and uncertain, like the world itself was holding its breath. Lydia stood at the edge of the porch, rifle in hand, eyes sweeping over the barren fields. The smoke she'd smelled in the night was real, thin trails rising from the direction of town. The horizon shimmered with heat, but beneath it lay the shape of riders, small and dark, moving closer with the patience of men who already believed the fight was theirs. Inside, the house was still. Evie slept against her father's arm, her small hand gripping his sleeve as though it were an anchor in a restless sea. Jonas sat upright despite the blood seeping through the fresh bandage on his shoulder. He hadn't slept. Lydia could tell by the weight in his eyes, the dull glaze of a man who had accepted that the day would demand everything he had left. "They'll come soon," Lydia said quietly. Jonas nodded, his voice low. "I reckon they already have." He rose slowly, every movement deliberate. "You need to take your mother and the girl and go east. There's a creek bed about a mile out. Keep low and follow it until the hills start to rise." Lydia shook her head. "You'll die out here alone." He gave her a faint, tired smile. "That's likely, but I won't take you down with me." She stepped closer. "You think I've lived this long by watching men die for me? If they want you, they'll have to take both of us." His gaze lingered on her, something raw flickering behind his stoicism. "You got too much fight for a world that don't deserve it." "Maybe," she said, "but it's the only thing I've got left." Jonas said nothing more. They worked in silence, boarding the windows, scattering feed to distract the horses. Lydia's mother watched from her cot, her face pale and still as bone. "You can't stop what's coming," she murmured. "You can only choose how to meet it." By the time the riders reached the outer fence, the sun had climbed just enough to turn the world gold. Dust lifted around them like a shroud. There were 6 now, their leader in a dark coat that gleamed with fresh polish. He reined in his horse, calling out across the yard, "Jonas Ward." The voice carried clear and sharp. "You've run a long way, but you know how this ends. We want the deed. Hand it over, and maybe we leave the woman breathing." Jonas stepped forward, revolver hanging loose at his side. "You boys burned everything I ever owned. The only deed I've got left is to my name, and you can't have that." The leader's smile was thin as wire. "Then you'll die with it." Lydia saw the moment the first shot came. The flash of sunlight on metal, the puff of dust at Jonas's feet. He moved like instinct itself, returning fire before the sound had finished echoing. The air exploded with gunfire, bullets whining against the wood, glass shattering. Lydia ducked behind the trough, her heart pounding, and fired twice. One rider fell, his body twisting in the dust. Evie screamed from inside the house. Lydia turned, ready to run, but Jonas shouted, "Stay down." Another bullet tore into the doorframe inches from her shoulder. The fight stretched into chaos. The smell of gunpowder, the hiss of burning were where a bullet had found oil near the stove. Jonas moved through it like a man shaped by violence, steady and unflinching, each shot deliberate. Lydia mirrored him, firing only when she was sure, until her rifle clicked empty. Smoke began to crawl along the walls. Lydia darted inside, coughing, and found her mother slumped but alive, Evie pressed against her chest. The girl's eyes were wide, glistening with terror. Lydia knelt, forcing calm into her voice. "You have to go to the creek, just like he said. Stay hidden, no matter what happens." Evie shook her head violently. "Not without Pa." "Evie." A thunderous crack cut her off as the front door splintered inward. Jonas stumbled through, blood streaking his side, firing back over his shoulder. Lydia grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back. "We have to move." He caught her wrist, his breath coming ragged. "You get them out. Now." "No." Her voice trembled, but she didn't let go. "Not without you." A bullet tore through the wall beside them, scattering fragments of light and dust. Jonas gritted his teeth, pushed her toward the cellar door. "Please," he said, voice raw, "don't make what I've done mean nothing." Lydia stared at him for half a heartbeat too long, then turned to drag Evie and her mother below. She looked back once, the image burning itself into her memory. Jonas, backlit by the rising sun to the shattered doorway, his revolver steady, his silhouette sharp and lonely. The gunfire above became distant, muffled by the thick earth around them. Lydia held Evie close, whispering whatever words came to her, half prayers, half promises. The air smelled of smoke and dirt and iron. Time dissolved into a single long breath. Then the world went quiet. When Lydia finally climbed back up, the light was different, orange and cruel. The front of the house was burning. Ash fell like black snow. Jonas lay near the well, his shirt dark with blood, his revolver empty. Around him, the men who'd come for him were scattered, some still, some crawling, none whole. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Jonas," she whispered. He blinked slowly, eyes finding her through the haze. "You kept them safe?" "Yes." Her voice broke. "But you're not." He cut her off with a faint shake of his head. "Don't waste tears. Not out here." His hand fumbled in his coat pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He pressed it into her palm. "Deed to the last of my land. What's left of it. Use it right." Lydia clutched it tight, feeling the warmth leave his fingers. "You don't have to go," she said, though the truth hung heavy between them. Jonas looked past her, to where Evie stood in the doorway, small and trembling. "Tell her I kept my word. Tell her she's free now." His breath hitched once, then stilled. The world seemed to exhale with him. Lydia bowed her head, the noise of crackling flames filling the silence he left behind. She stayed until the fire burned low, until the sun began to slip behind the hills again. Then she rose, her clothes streaked with ash, her face carved with something harder than grief. Evie clung to her side, tears streaking her soot-covered cheeks. Lydia looked out across the plains, the vast, unforgiving land that had taken so much, and felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly. Something quieter. Resolve. By dusk, the fire was out. She buried Jonas near the well, marked the spot with a rough cross cut from barnwood. Evie stood beside her, silent except for a single question whispered into the wind. Will he find Mama now? Lydia swallowed hard. If there's any justice left in this world, he already has. Days passed. They salvaged what they could, mended what remained. The fields lay black and scarred, but the soil beneath was still alive. Lydia worked it with bare hands, feeling the weight of promise in the dirt. The deed Jonas had given her was tucked safely inside her coat, a piece of another life, one she would build again, not from gold or cattle, but from grit and mercy. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Lydia saddled the dark gelding that had once been Jonas's. Evie rode beside her on the smaller pony, clutching the wooden horse he'd carved. They rode past the graves, past the smoking ruins, until the land opened wide, and the wind met them clean and cold. Lydia looked toward the fading light, the endless stretch of country that asked nothing and gave less. For the first time, she didn't feel trapped by it.